So we're going to talk about virtual meetings, and we thought we'd hopefully get ourselves in character by wearing our virtual meeting outfits.
Let me get my hoodie off.
Mike actually wanted to wear no pants, but that was ran afoul of the Union League dress code, so we stuck him with jeans. So 6 years ago in 2017, Tim Burdick gave a flash talk, Tales from the Road, which is basically sort of a compilation of experiences gained from 20 years of being a consultant in the consultant industry, working with investment committees, boards, staff, sort of do's and don'ts, best ideas. But when Tim gave that talk, there were two words that were not in any of our vernaculars at that time that have really changed our life a lot over the last couple of years. One was COVID, and the other one was Zoom. And so as a result, the shape and structure of how we all get together, make decisions, stay on top of the portfolios that we oversee have changed a lot. And so we thought we'd take this opportunity to kind of briefly go through the experience we had through COVID and some of our lessons learned and how we see things going forward. So I am joined by Aimee O'Connor and Mike Piotrowski, two consultants at Marquette. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves briefly, let everybody know how long you've worked at Marquette, how long you've worked in the industry, and then a little bit about your clients, and then we'll get right into it.
Okay. I am Aimee O'Connor. I'm a consultant and partner at Marquette. I've worked in the industry for 20 years. I've been at Marquette since 2019. Prior to Marquette, I worked at another consulting firm for 11 years. I work with both family office, ultra high net worth, and nonprofit clients. And I'm an avid slipper lover. And I'll turn it over to Mike.
And I'm Mike Piotrowski. I'm glad I'm not muted right now. We figured that out. General consultant, partner. I've been at the firm for 18 years. As a result, I like to refer to myself as a mutt. I've worked with almost every single type of clients over the years. Whether it's public funds, multi-employer, Taft-Hartley plans, endowments, foundations, nonprofit, healthcare, private client. I think that covers it all. So hopefully my perspective as a generalist will be beneficial today.
So we will move quickly, but just sort of briefly describe kind of that first sort of 3 to 6 months of COVID of what changed with client meetings, what were you able to do, how frequently were clients able to meet. Just describe a little bit of sort of how your experience was.
I would say it was client dependent in the sense of families and family offices. It's a lot more personal and emotional, so a lot more phone calls frequently in the beginning of COVID as markets started to decline. Nonprofits, a little bit different. Everyone was trying to figure out the new normal, the new work from home. There was a lot of logistics to think about internally. So I would say meeting cadence went down with that actually.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Aimee. Initially, when the pandemic hit, meetings dropped off pretty quickly. The reality is that the investment portfolios, while certainly important, were less important to organizations in general. A lot of the groups we were working with were struggling with operations, how they were setting up employees remotely, et cetera. But obviously, that reversed pretty quickly, and everyone adapted into this new normal. And I think that was pretty consistent across our client base.
So, Mike, I'll start with you. Where are we now? A couple years sort of after COVID initially hit. What percentage of your meetings are being done virtually? What percentage of your meetings done in person?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think it's very dependent upon client type. Working with a wide variety of clients, I would say about a third of mine are fully back in person. A lot of those were client types that were largely in person to begin with. So think the public sector, public safety, police and fire, Taft-Hartley, so the trades, laborers, iron workers, right? Their jobs didn't stop. They were like largely the first ones to come back. I would say the other third, or the second third, were groups that were largely remote to begin with national membership bases. And then the other third are in that hybrid role, which I think was where a lot of organizations ultimately are today, or where they will end up, is having that dual role, or that dual in-person and remote optionality. But I do think that organizations and clients are still trying to determine the best path forward and what that mix looks like to them.
Aimee?
Yeah, I would agree in a lot of ways, but I think the way that people came back and the cadence that they came back to in-person or meetings depended on client type, and I also think specific situations. So whether it was age demographics, higher risk situations, or even geographic locations sometimes dictated how quickly people came back. That's right. And from there, I think that the meetings today have really shifted. It's a lot more flexibility as it is in the workforce, but it's also, we do see options for committee members to join remotely, even if it's in person, a lot more flexibility to have partial in-person or partially remote meetings. And so most of the clients I find are now at least back in person at least one time a year, if not fully back in person for meetings.
So talk a little bit about kind of the benefits of the virtual approach, but also sort of any pet peeves associated with virtual meetings.
I think virtual is great in so many different ways, in the sense of it opens the universe of committee members that you can have. It opens that if somebody can't join or isn't feeling well or has other obligations, they can join. But making decisions on portfolios is very hard to do virtually. I mean, we talk about a lot of numbers. You've heard a lot of probably statistics today, seen a lot of charts. And no matter what, if we're sharing our screens and pointing you to something, it's very hard to follow virtually. And so it's fine to do brief market portfolio updates if there's no action items, but as we get into making portfolio decisions, I do think that is a lot easier done in person. My preference is always to meet with my clients in person at least twice a year if possible, and the more the better.
Mike?
Yeah, and I would echo Amy's comments. I think virtual is great. I think a lot of groups that have national bases have been able to attract very strong investment and board committee members, and having that optionality is fantastic. That being said, I will say nothing replaces in-person meetings. What I have found is that either fully in-person or fully remote tends to work best. When you have a mix of in-person and remote, sometimes the conversation isn't as strong. My colleagues may not like me saying this, but for groups that aren't meeting in person, I do think there's real value to meet at least once a year in person. The groups that I've worked with and clients where we haven't and we've gone back and had that interaction, almost every single time the feedback has just been fantastic about the discussion, the engagement, and the quality of the overall meeting. So what we've learned is that remote works, but I do think there is some value in person.
And how about the materials? I know when I started at Marquette and I joined a consultant for a client meeting, you'd show up and you had this huge stack of books, and that was kind of what the whole meeting was about. You'd show up, you pass the books out. Most people had never seen any of the material that were in the books before the meeting, and the meeting was really to talk about the information in those books. A lot has changed since then. So what do you guys do now for material for a virtual meeting? How is that different to how things were before?
I would say that that's one of the biggest changes, at least for me, with working with a lot of clients remote. As Nat said, in the past it was, bring these books, these 50, 150-page executive summary reports with a ton of details, and that shifted dramatically. Those type of documents, while very valuable, are very difficult to present on a screen. So what I've noticed is a movement towards presentation format, like the slides we've seen today. A lot of the work we're doing at virtual meetings is very streamlined in that presentation format.
Amy, how about you?
If the meeting is virtual, most of the clients are receiving electronic copies, and I would also say most of our clients still receive electronic copies prior to the meeting, well in advance to be able to prepare, but when I'm in person, pretty much 100% of my clients are still receiving hard copies, but it has reduced significantly because there are the virtual meetings.
Yeah, the other thing, so a lot more work on meeting materials in advance, making sure they're out. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely been a focus and a shift.
So I'm going to put you two on the spot a little bit here. There's no right way to do this. We work with lots of different clients that do lots of different things. But if you had your ideal client and your ideal structure, how frequently would you meet, and what type of meeting would it be between virtual, in-person, hybrid? What would the cadence be? Mike, maybe you go first.
I'm a big proponent of quarterly meetings. I do think that that's a proper cadence. I think you could go up to 6 meetings a year. That being said, there's also been some successes we've had with clients that have met less frequently or semi-annually. But I think a quarterly cadence is great. A combination, selfishly, of in-person and remote is great. Nothing against our friends from Michigan, but flying to Michigan in February is a little bit challenging. It's nice to have the option to remote into that. You know, 2 in-person, 2 remote quarterly is, you know, what I would say is kind of the standard from my perspective on proper, you know, meeting cadence and governance.
Aimee?
I agree with the quarterly. I think quarterly is the ideal scenario. Meeting too frequently, a lot of times we find clients want to make change just to make change in portfolios. We've met 3, we've met 4, we've met 5 times now, and we haven't made any changes to the portfolio. And it doesn't mean just because we're meeting, we need to make changes. So I think that quarterly allows us to stay updated, not have surprises to what's going on in the market or portfolios. But I would say semi-annual would work too. Annually is probably a little too infrequent. And then I would say the last piece is virtual and in-person works. I prefer in-person as much as possible, but at least 1 in-person meeting a year, and the rest could be remote. But I would say that 1 in-person meeting a year is necessary for the relationship and also just diving a little deeper into portfolios.
And maybe just to expand on that a little bit more, clients and committees that are meeting less frequently, that's okay. It also depends on the level of service that we're providing. So for many of our client relationships, they're non-discretionary services, meaning we're advising our clients, they're making the decisions and executing those. But as Brian mentioned earlier with our OCIO and discretionary services, the way our industry is moving is largely in that direction. And groups that are outsourcing certain decision and administrative functions to us, investment advisors and consultants, can operate with meeting less often.
One of the other things I think I've noticed happened a lot during COVID, as it became a little harder to make some decisions virtually, was sort of the pre-meeting. So a little bit more prep so that people were aware of what were the action items, what were you listening to. So how often are you doing pre-meetings with clients? Where is it helpful? Where is it necessary? Where is it not necessary? Aimee, maybe I'll start with you.
I would say I probably have a handful of clients that do pre-meetings. It's not a regular thing that occurs, but I do think it's very helpful for talking about potential issues or potential things that may come up in the meeting, either from us or from committee members or family members, so that everyone is, again, prepared and ready to have a healthy dialogue. I would also say where it's very helpful is as there's new either committee members or new staff, new CFO, we can help them, guide them on the portfolio prior to the meeting. So again, there's no surprises in this. So I would say they're very helpful where people want to have them, but also understanding there's a lot of time constraints. So it's not a regular thing that occurs very frequently between all of the clients.
Yeah, I agree. Pre-meetings are in general great. I think it's always important, as Aimee said, to avoid surprises, to be aligned with staff and committee members and trustees in advance of meetings. Whether or not it's a one-on-one call or a call with, say, a committee chair and a CFO or staff, you know, each is right in its own way. Pre-meeting calls and that alignment is particularly important when you're having a meeting where you're looking to take action, whether or not it's modifying an asset allocation policy, which a lot of our clients are going through right now, making tough decisions on managers, whether it's hiring or firing. Those particular meetings where you're trying to get a lot accomplished, being aligned in advance is extremely helpful.
So last question, and then we've got lunch. So this is the only thing standing between everybody else and lunch, so be succinct. There has been a lot of talk over the last year or two about the Great Resignation, and that obviously happened in the financial services industry, but we also saw it happen with our committees, with staff that we work with on a regular basis. So maybe just take us through a little bit of lessons learned and best practices for, as we have a new key relationship person on staff, as there's new committee members on board, what have you seen work well to help those people kind of get on board and get up to speed with the rest of the committee and the things that we've been doing? Mike, I'll start with you, and then we'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think lessons learned is, you know, we weren't immune from what we saw in the marketplace. So a lot of the clients I work with in particular, we saw significant levels of turnover at kind of lower staff levels as well as C-level staff members. We also saw turnover with trustees and committee members. So in a lot of instances, when you have those leadership changes, they become new client relationships. And it's imperative on us to spend time with clients outside of meetings, pre-meeting calls, to do the education, to provide the historical perspective on the portfolios. Oftentimes, we've worked with clients for 15 or 20 years. We're the longest standing, person in that room. And so it's our job to kind of go the extra mile. I think the lesson learned is don't be afraid to communicate as we go forward.
I'm going through this right now with a new CFO at an organization, and it's going really, really well. And we do a cadence of pre-meetings, and part of our quarterly reports has summaries of some changes that we've made in portfolios, so it helps guide. But it is the importance of somebody being able to come into a meeting and kind of hit the ground running and understand why we are where we are in the portfolio and what changes we've made recently. So those getting to know new committee members, getting to know new staff members, but also understanding like where we came from, where we are, and where we're headed, and the why of that, I think is just very important as there's new people. And I think that's a role that we can play very in a very good form. So it's nice to have those kind of sit downs and get together when there's new committee members and new staff members.
So we spend a lot of time at Marquette thinking about investments. That's what we spend most of our time doing. But I think maybe you've gotten a little sense of this, of having good governance and decision-making structure around those investment decisions can be just as important to a successful client outcome. And that's something we also spend a lot of time talking about and thinking about internally. So with that, I want to say thank you all very much. I look forward to hopefully seeing all of you on a Zoom in the near future. And
in our uniforms.
Stay right where you are. Salads and lunches coming out right now. And then Ben Mesrich, our keynote speaker, will be coming on at 12:45. Thanks very much.